My brother did not call. He did not write. He just appeared at my front door on a Tuesday morning in July with a carry-on bag at his feet and 5 years of absence on his face. I had not heard the car pull up. I had not heard the gate. I just heard the knock. 3 times, firm. And when I opened that door and saw Neville standing there in a linen shirt with his silver hair and his good shoes, my hand went to my chest before my mouth could form a single word. He looked at me the same way, not with joy, not with the smile I had been carrying in my memory for 5 years. He looked at me the way a man looks when what he sees does not match what he was told. He stepped forward and pulled me into his arms, and I felt it. The way his grip tightened, the way he held on a breath too long. When he pulled back, his eyes moved across my face, down to my shoulders, across the porch, behind me. The peeling rail. The window unit rattling against the July heat. The curtains so thin the morning light came straight through them. He had not said a word yet. He did not need to. My name is Martha Stewart. I have lived in this house in Birmingham, Alabama for 31 years. I raised my son in it. I buried my husband from it. And for the last 3 years, I have been surviving inside it on the kindness of my church, the benevolence fund, the food pantry, the deacons who brought groceries and never made me feel small for accepting them. I want to stop here and ask, where are you watching from today? Drop your city in the comments. Because what I am about to tell you, I need you close for it. Neville stepped inside. He sat down on my sofa and looked around the room slowly, not rudely, the way a man looks when he is doing arithmetic in his head. Then he looked at me. Martha. His voice was quiet. You don't look like somebody getting $20,000 a month. Why? The room went very still. I heard what he said. I processed every word. But my mind could not find a place to put it. $20,000. Every month. I looked at my brother's face and I saw that he was not confused. He was not mistaken. He had been sending money, real money, substantial money, and he had believed it was reaching me. I told him the truth. The church had been keeping me alive. The benevolence fund covered my utilities twice last winter. Sister Pauline from the choir brought me a bag of groceries every other Friday. I had not asked anyone for anything I did not desperately need. Neville did not raise his voice. He did not move dramatically. He simply reached into his shirt pocket and took out his phone. His jaw was set in the way I remembered from when we were children. That particular stillness that meant something in him had shifted and would not be shifting back. He dialed. He held the phone to his ear. It rang twice, then a third time. Then my son's voice came through, smooth and unhurried, warm even, the voice of a man with nothing to hide. Uncle Neville, what a surprise! Everything okay? Neville's eyes did not leave my face. Terrell, he said, where is your mother's money? The pause that followed was exactly 1 second long. Then Terrell said, Uncle Neville, I can explain everything. Why don't we sit down together? I'll come to you. Calm, unbothered, already performing. Terrell came the next morning. He walked into my living room with a paper bag of pastries he knew I liked and kissed my cheek the way he always did. Left side, 1 press, quick. He shook Neville's hand. He sat down. He was relaxed in the way only a man with a prepared story can be relaxed. I watched him settle into my sofa and I thought about the last 3 years. The first year after Neville left for the UK, money came through sporadically. $20 1 week, $50 the next. Sometimes nothing for 3 weeks and then $100 that Terrell handed me in an envelope with a brief explanation. Transfer delays, international fees. The account needed verification. I did not understand the mechanics, and Terrell knew I did not understand them. He never offered to explain more than I asked. And I stopped asking because every question felt like ingratitude toward a son who was at least showing up. He told me early, within the first few months, that Neville had changed. That success does something to people. That I should not expect the same brother I knew because the UK had given him a different life and different priorities. He said it gently. The way you deliver disappointing news about someone you respect. He said Neville still cared, but that I should not measure that caring by phone calls or money, because men like Neville express love differently now. I believed him. Terrell was my son. He had no reason to lie. On the occasions I called Neville myself, I could feel something had been arranged before I dialed. Neville was always careful with his words, warm but measured, never asking directly whether I was managing, never pushing past my answers. At the time, I read it as the distance Terrell had warned me about. Now, sitting in that living room watching my son eat a pastry, I understood it differently. Terrell had spoken to Neville before those calls. He had shaped the conversation before it started. That was not distance. That was management. I survived on the church. The benevolence fund covered my light bill twice the winter before last. Sister Pauline brought groceries every other Friday without ever making me feel reduced by it. The deacons checked on me. I was not invisible in my suffering. I was just invisible to the people who should have seen it first. And still, Terrell came, regularly, reliably, with small amounts delivered like gifts. $20 for my birthday. $50 when he noticed the window unit was struggling. A bag of groceries at Thanksgiving set beside the door before he left. Each one just enough. Each one delivered with the warmth of a good son. I thanked him every time. I had nothing else to give but gratitude, and he accepted it without blinking. 14 months before Neville knocked on my door, a piece of mail arrived that was not meant for me. It was a bank statement. The account name had Terrell's name on it, but my address on the envelope. I looked at the numbers on that page, and they did not make sense to me. The figures were large, larger than anything I associated with my own life. I did not understand what account it was, or why it existed, or what the transactions meant. I was not a woman who understood international transfers or joint account structures, but I did not throw it away. I do not know exactly why. Something in me, some quiet, unnamed instinct, said to keep it. I folded it along its original crease and slipped it into my Bible, between the book of Job and the book of Psalms, where I kept things I was not ready to release. That night, after Terrell left and the house went quiet, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at the Bible on my nightstand. I did not open it. I just looked at it. Something was in there. I did not know what it meant yet, but I knew I was not ready to let it go. Terrell left without resolving anything. He had smiled and eaten his pastry and said all the right words and walked out of my front door with the same ease he walked in. Neville sat across from me after the door closed, and neither of us spoke for a long moment. That evening, Neville asked me to sit with him at the kitchen table. He set his phone between us and opened a screen I did not immediately understand. A list of dates running down the left side, numbers running down the right. He did not explain it first. He just turned the phone so I could see it clearly and let me look. Every month for 3 years. The same amount, $20,000, sent from his account in the UK to a joint account here in Birmingham. Month after month after month. 36 entries. I did not rush through them. I let each one land separately, each date, each amount, each month of my life that I now had to place beside that number. December. I borrowed $40 from Sister Pauline for my water bill. February. The food pantry gave me 2 bags, and I was grateful enough to cry on the drive home. July. I wore the same pair of shoes to church for 11 months because I could not justify buying another pair. $20,000. Every single month. I did not cry. Something in me went very quiet instead. The kind of quiet that comes not from peace, but from a weight too large for tears to address. Neville watched my face the whole time. When I finally looked up at him, he did not look away. He said, "Martha, I should have called you myself." He said it plainly. No defense built around it. He told me that Terrell had come to him early, within the first few months of the arrangement, and said I was proud about money, that I had asked them not to make it a topic between us. That direct questions about finances embarrassed me. Neville said he accepted it because it fit the sister he knew, because I had always carried myself with dignity, and he did not want to strip that from me by pushing. Then he told me something else. Every few months, Terrell sent him account screenshots and summaries, balance figures, transaction histories, notes explaining what had been paid and what had been set aside. Neville said he never saw anything that suggested a problem. Everything looked orderly, accounted for, reasonable. He had accepted those reports because they matched the story Terrell was already telling him about me. He said trusting the arrangement was easier than questioning it. He said that out loud, about himself, without flinching. I looked at my brother. This man who had built a life across an ocean, who had sent money faithfully every single month for 3 years. And I understood that he had been deceived as deliberately as I had. Terrell had closed the loop from both ends. He managed what Neville believed about me. He managed what I believed about Neville. And in the space between those two managed truths, he built himself a life. I asked Neville one question. Where did it go? He told me, a joint account. He had set it up before he left. He wanted a U.S. side structure so the transfers would clear reliably. Terrell had volunteered to manage it. It seemed practical at the time. Martha did not have a smartphone, did not do online banking, and Terrell was right there and willing. I asked him, what joint account? Neville's expression shifted, something moving behind his eyes that was not quite guilt and not quite grief, but lived in the territory between them. The account is in both your names, he said, but Terrell was the one with access. I had never seen a statement, never received a card, never been told the account number. My name had been on something for 3 years that I did not know existed. I placed my hand flat on the kitchen table. Not dramatically, not with anger. Just flat, deliberate, both feet on the ground. I was not ready to speak yet, but I was done being still. We drove to Terrell's house the following morning. I had been to that house many times. Sunday dinners, holidays, the occasional Saturday when Landra would call and say, "Come eat with us." We made too much food. I had always left feeling grateful, full, loved even. I sat in Neville's rental car now and looked at the front of that house through the windshield, the new construction, the clean lines, the 2 cars sitting in the driveway like a statement. And I thought about every meal I had eaten at that table. I had thanked Landra for her cooking. I had complimented the curtains. I had sat in rooms my money built and called it hospitality. I filed that thought where I could find it later and got out of the car. Terrell opened the door before we knocked. He had been watching for us. His face carried hurt, not guilt, hurt. The particular expression of a man who has prepared to be misunderstood and arrived early to receive it. He stepped back and let us in. The house was clean and quiet. Landra was not home. We sat in the living room. Neville did not waste time. He asked directly, the account, the money, 3 years of transfers, and where it had gone. Terrell nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he has been waiting for a question he already knows how to answer. He said the account was set up for my protection. He said managing international transfers required someone with access and availability, and that he had taken that responsibility seriously. He said there were expenses, my utility bills he had been covering quietly, a medical copay from 2 years ago, repairs to my roof after a storm. He stood up and went to the kitchen and came back with a folder. It was thick, organized, tabbed. He laid it on the coffee table and opened it toward Neville. Receipts, printouts, dates, and amounts typed cleanly. He walked through it calmly, page by page, his voice never rising, his hands never moving too fast. He was not defending himself. He was presenting evidence. There is a difference, and Terrell understood it completely. Neville pushed back on 2 figures. Terrell had a response for both. Neville raised his voice slightly on the third. Terrell waited for him to finish and then answered in the same measured tone he had started with. I said almost nothing. I was not silent because I had nothing to say. I was silent because I was listening to the spaces between his answers. The things he explained before he was asked. The receipts that appeared for expenses I did not remember authorizing. The way he referenced my well-being with a warmth that had no heat in it. A man telling the truth does not need a tabbed folder. When we stood to leave, Neville was tight with frustration. The specific frustration of a man who knows something is wrong but cannot yet locate exactly where the lie lives. I touched his arm as we walked to the car. I was not frustrated. I was clear. We drove in silence for 2 minutes. Then Neville said, "He had everything ready." "Yes," I said. "He did." I did not say what I was thinking. That a man who prepares that carefully for a confrontation has been expecting it for a long time. That the folder was not assembled yesterday. That somewhere between those tabbed receipts and that measured voice was a story built specifically for this moment. As Neville turned out of the street, I felt Terrell watching our car from his front window. I did not look back. I had already seen everything I came to see. 3 days after we left Terrell's house, my doctor's office called to confirm an appointment. The receptionist, a young woman I had spoken to a dozen times without incident, read back my appointment details twice. Then she asked, slowly and carefully, whether I had someone who could drive me. I told her I drove myself to every appointment. She said, of course, she just wanted to make sure I had support. Her voice had the particular gentleness people use with someone they have been told to handle carefully. I thanked her and hung up the phone. I sat with that call for a moment. Then I let it go and filed it. 2 days after that, I was on my porch when my neighbor Cecile came by. We had known each other for 20 years. She was not a woman who chose her words carefully. She was direct, plain-spoken, the kind of neighbor who told you when your porch light was out without being asked. That afternoon, she sat in the chair beside me and talked around everything. She asked how I was feeling in a way that meant she'd already been told how I was feeling. She paused before finishing sentences. She watched my face the way people watch a face when they are checking for something specific. I noticed. I did not show that I noticed. Then on Sunday, after service, Deacon Harris caught me near the side door. He was warm about it. He always was. But he pulled me gently aside and told me Terrell had stopped by his home earlier that week. Said the family was concerned. Said I had seemed confused lately, forgetful, that I was having trouble keeping track of things. He said it with care, the way a man delivers a message he believes is coming from love. I thanked him. I told him I was fine. I walked to my car. I sat in that parking lot for a long time. Terrell had not panicked after our visit. He had not called Neville to negotiate or come back to my house to apologize. He had gone to work. Quietly, methodically. In the days immediately following, he had visited my doctor's orbit, my neighbor, my deacon. He was not building a defense against what Neville had. He was building a jury against what I might say. He was constructing a version of Martha Stewart, confused, forgetful, unreliable, and he was placing that version carefully into the minds of every person whose testimony might one day matter. I did not call Neville that evening. I needed to think before I spoke. I went home. I went to my bedroom. I took the bank statement from my Bible and held it in my hands. The one that had arrived 14 months ago with Terrell's name on the account and my address on the envelope. I had kept it without fully understanding why. That instinct did not feel small to me anymore. Then I opened the drawer beside my bed and took out a notebook. I had started it the same night I put the bank statement in my Bible. I could not sleep that night. Something about those numbers had unsettled me in a way I could not name, and I had reached for the notebook I used for church notes and started writing. Not accusations, not a plan, just things I had noticed, dates, amounts Terrell had given me, conversations that felt slightly off, things I wanted to remember in case I ever needed to remember them. 14 months of entries, all of it in my handwriting. All of it dated. Terrell had never searched my home. It had never occurred to him that I was the kind of woman who wrote things down. He had looked at me and seen someone who could be managed. That was his first mistake. I opened the notebook to the first page and looked at my own handwriting. Dated 14 months ago, the night this all began without my knowing it. Neville found an attorney by the end of the week. His office was on the 3rd floor of a building on 2nd Avenue North. Quiet, professional. The kind of space that made you lower your voice without being asked. We sat across from his desk on a Thursday morning, and Neville laid out everything. The transfer records, the joint account structure, 3 years, $20,000 monthly, a sister who received nothing. The attorney listened without interrupting. When Neville finished, he was quiet for a moment, and then he said the case had real weight. The wire transfers were documented. The account structure was traceable. Under Alabama law, Section 38-9F-4, the deliberate misappropriation of funds belonging to an elder adult carried both civil and criminal provisions. A civil suit for conversion of funds was the strongest immediate vehicle. The paper trail Neville already held was the foundation. I sat and listened, and understood enough to follow without needing every word explained. Then the attorney paused and said there was a complication. If the redirected funds had been used as capital in a business venture involving an outside investor, recovery became considerably more complex. Pulling Martha's money out of an active business without damaging a legitimate third party required careful, legal strategy. It could not be done quickly. It would need to be done correctly. Neville asked who the investor was. The attorney turned a page. He explained that after reviewing the transfer records, he had spent several days tracing public business filings, LLC registrations, commercial property records, and corporate documents connected to Terrell's recent activities. The same name appeared repeatedly alongside Terrell's in a Birmingham commercial property venture. Calvin Reese. I knew that name. 18 months ago, I was sitting at Terrell's dining table on a Sunday. Landra had made her good dishes, the ones she only brought out when the meal was meant to feel like an occasion. The kitchen smelled like something slow-cooked, and the table was set properly, placemats and everything. Terrell was in a good mood, expansive. He refilled Neville's glass. No, Neville was not there. It was just me and them that evening. He refilled my glass and leaned back in his chair and said he was going into business with a good man. Said his name was Calvin Reese. Said things were looking up. Said he finally felt like he was building something real. I had smiled across that table. I told him I was proud of him. I thanked Landra for the food before I left. In the attorney's parking lot afterward, Neville and I sat in the car without moving. The engine was off. The Alabama afternoon pressed against the windows. I thought about that Sunday dinner, the good dishes, the slow-cooked smell. Terrell, expansive and confident at the head of his own table, talking about opportunity and good men and things looking up. I had sat in that chair and eaten that food and felt, for one evening, that my son was going to be all right. I had not known I was the investor. I had not known the house I was sitting in, the table I was eating at, the dishes Landra carried out with both hands. All of it had been purchased with money that was supposed to be building my life, not performing his. I had thanked Landra for the food. That thought sat in my chest in a specific way that I did not have language for. Not rage, not grief, exactly. Something more precise than both of those. The particular weight of a woman understanding the full architecture of how she was used. Neville said, "We'll figure out the Reese situation. It doesn't change what we're doing." I nodded, but I was not thinking about what we were doing. I was thinking about that Sunday evening, the way Terrell had smiled, the way I had driven home full and grateful and completely in the dark. Some roads are longer than they first appear, and some distances cannot be measured in miles. I did not know what was happening inside that house. Not then. What follows is what I learned later, from Landra and herself, from the documents she brought forward, and from conversations that happened after everything began unraveling. And this is how she told it. Landra had built a good life. That was the truth she told herself every morning in the house Terrell provided. The new construction with the wide kitchen and the good light, the 2 cars, the dishes she brought out on Sundays, the vacations they took without explaining to anyone how they afforded them. She had built a good life, and she had protected it the only way she knew how. By not asking. She told me that when Terrell came home the evening after our visit, his face was controlled in the specific way that meant something was moving underneath it. He kissed her cheek and went to change his clothes, and came back to the kitchen and talked about dinner like it was an ordinary evening. She let him. She had learned years ago that pushing Terrell when he was controlled only produced more control. That night, after he fell asleep, she got up and went to the second bedroom where she kept the household files. She said she was not looking for anything specific. She told herself she was just organizing. But her hands went directly to the folder where Terrell kept the property documents, and she pulled the house deed and looked at it under the desk lamp. Her name. Her name only, not Terrell's, on the deed of the house they had bought 3 years earlier. She pulled the next document, a joint account statement. Her name again. Then another account. An investment vehicle structured around the commercial property venture. Her name as the listed account holder. Terrell as the managing signatory. She opened her laptop. She searched Calvin Reese in the public business filings database. She found the venture. She found the capital contribution listed under her name, not Terrell's. She sat back and looked at the screen. The house, the accounts, the business investment, all of it structured in her name. Later, sitting at my kitchen table, Landra admitted something difficult. She had known they were living beyond what Terrell's salary explained. She had noticed it the way you notice a room is warm without checking the thermostat, present and comfortable and unexamined. He was good with money, she told herself. He had opportunities she did not fully understand. She had not asked because asking meant knowing. And knowing meant she could no longer sit at her own Sunday table without feeling the ground shift beneath it. She had believed that not asking protected her. She understood now under that desk lamp that it had done the opposite. Every document with her name on it was not a gift. It was a position. Terrell had not put her name on those things because he trusted her. He had put her name on them because if anything unraveled, when anything unraveled, she would be the one holding the legal exposure. He had not built her a life. He had built himself an exit. She told me she heard him turn over in the bedroom. She closed the laptop and sat very still until the house was quiet again. She thought about me. She had sat across from me at Sunday dinners for years, watched me eat quietly, watched me thank her for food I had no idea was purchased with my own money. She had told herself I seemed fine, content, that whatever Terrell managed between us was family business she did not need to insert herself into. She had not asked about that either. Then Terrell appeared in the doorway. "What are you doing up?" She looked at him. Couldn't sleep. He watched her for a moment. Then he went back to bed. Landra told me she sat in the dark for a long time after that. She was not a co-conspirator. She understood that now. But she was not a victim either, not yet. The only difference between those two things was the next decision she made. She did not sleep that night. The knock came on a Wednesday afternoon. Not the front door. The back. The door that opens off the kitchen. The one only people who know the house well enough use. I was at the sink when I heard it. 3 knocks, quiet and deliberate. I dried my hands and opened the door, and Landra was standing on my back step. No Terrell, no jewelry, no indication of the house or the cars or any of the life she had been living. She was wearing a plain blouse and flat shoes, and she was holding a manila envelope against her side with both hands pressed flat, like she had been gripping it the entire drive. Over. She said, "Can I come in?" It was not quite a question. I stepped aside. She sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Neville had shown me the transfer records 6 days earlier. She set the envelope down, but kept one hand on it. She did not look around the kitchen the way a guilty person looks around a room. She looked directly at me, and she did not waste either of our time. She told me what was in the envelope. Account statements going back 30 months. Transfer confirmations that mapped money moving from the joint account into 2 separate accounts, both structured in her name. And one document she described carefully, a financial management agreement Terrell had put in front of her 2.5 years ago, told her it was standard paperwork for organizing their household finances, and watched her sign without reading it. That agreement had been used to restructure assets, the house, the accounts, the investment position, into her name while Terrell retained managing authority over all of it. She said, "I signed things I didn't read. I'm not going to pretend otherwise." I looked at her hands on that envelope. She said she wanted to speak to the attorney. She said she needed to be on record as a cooperating party before the legal process moved far enough that cooperation stopped being an option. She said she was not coming to me because she felt remorse. She said that plainly, without apology. Then she said, "But I also can't sit in that house, knowing what I know and do nothing." I understood both of those things to be true simultaneously. Survival and conscience are not always opposites. Sometimes they arrive at the same door together, and you do not need to decide which one knocked first. I said, "I know why you're here." She looked at me. I got up and put the kettle on. I made 2 cups of coffee. I set one in front of her, and I sat back down, and I asked her one question, whether there were any documents she had not brought that still existed in that house. She said there was one she had photographed on her phone before removing the original. She said she did it the night she found everything, before she had even decided to come here, before she fully knew what she was going to do. Just instinct. She said Terrell did not know she had done it. I nodded and wrapped both hands around my cup. We did not become friends at that table. There was too much sitting between us for that. 3 years of Sunday dinners, 3 years of good dishes carried out of a kitchen my money paid for, 3 years of thank yous I gave her that I would not be giving back. None of that dissolved over coffee. But 2 women who each hold something the other needs can become something the law can work with. And that is what we became. When she left, I stood at the kitchen window and watched her car back out of my driveway. Then I turned around and picked up the envelope. Neville called me on a Friday morning and told me Terrell had reached out to him the night before. I listened to the whole thing before I said a word. Terrell had not called to negotiate. He had not called to apologize or explain or offer anything new. He called to warn, dressed carefully in the language of concern, the way a man does when he wants to threaten without leaving fingerprints. He told Neville that pursuing this legally would destroy the family, that it would become public, and that public meant Martha's name in it. Martha's private circumstances exposed, Martha humiliated in front of people who respected her. He said Calvin Reese was a well-regarded Birmingham businessman, and that pulling him into a legal dispute would create the kind of enemies that did not go away after settlements were signed. He said all of this, Neville told me, in a calm and reasonable voice. I sat with that for a moment. The man who came to his front door with a tabbed folder and receipts organized by date, that man had been confident. Confident people do not make calls like this. Confident people let their documentation speak. This call was something else. This was a man who had looked at his architecture and found a crack he could not locate and was now applying pressure from the outside because he could no longer control it from within. The folder was preparation. This call was fear. I told Neville I understood and that I would speak to him later. Then I went and sat in my living room and waited. Terrell arrived at my house 2 hours later. He did not call first. He knocked, and when I opened the door, he was already arranged, his expression soft, his posture unthreatening, his voice, when he spoke, pitched low and careful. He came in and sat across from me, and he talked for a long time. He talked about the family, about what this kind of dispute does to people who love each other, about his name in this city and what accusations do to a name even when they are eventually disproven. He talked about our relationship, his word, relationship, as though 3 years of managed poverty had been a misunderstanding between equals. He said he wanted to sit down together, all of them, and work this out privately without attorneys turning a family matter into a legal one. He threaded it carefully. Enough tenderness to sound like a son, enough pressure to sound like a warning, never fully committing to either. I listened to every word. I did not show him the envelope Landra had left on my table. I did not say her name. I did not tell him about the attorney or the documents or anything that had moved since the day we sat in his living room, and he opened his folder. I received everything he said with the stillness of a woman who had nothing to hide and nowhere to be. When he finished, I asked if he wanted a glass of water. He looked at me for a moment, something shifting behind his eyes. A brief uncertainty, the first I had seen from him in any of these rooms. He said no. He stood up. He said he hoped I would think about what he had said. I told him I would. I walked him to the door. I watched his car back out of my driveway. I closed the door and stood in my hallway for exactly the amount of time it took me to confirm he was gone. Then I picked up my phone and called Neville. I told him everything Terrell had said, every word, every pause, every place where the tenderness and the threat changed places. I left nothing out. Because a man who comes to his mother's house to manage her silence has already told you everything you need to know. We went back to the attorney 2 days after Terrell's visit. I carried 2 things into that office: the bank statement from my Bible, the one that had arrived by mistake 14 months ago, and the notebook from the drawer beside my bed. I set them both on the attorney's desk without explanation and let him look. He picked up the bank statement first. He examined the account name, the address, the transaction figures. He set it aside and opened the notebook. He did not skim it. He read it the way a man reads something he understands the value of. Slowly, from the beginning, turning each page with the same deliberate care. Neville sat beside me and said nothing. I watched the attorney's face move through the entries, And I felt something I had not expected to feel in that office. Not pride, not relief, something quieter. The feeling of being believed before you have even finished speaking. The notebook began 14 months before Neville knocked on my front door. Every entry in my handwriting, every entry dated. The first pages were the smallest things. The date Terrell brought me $20, and I wrote down the amount because I wanted to remember what came in and what went out. Then the dates I called Neville and the way those conversations felt managed, thin, carefully navigated. Then the date I overheard Terrell on the phone in my hallway. I had written down the pieces I caught without understanding what they connected to. A number. A name I did not recognize at the time. The words, "Not yet. Give it another month." Then the date I saw Terrell's car parked outside a building on Lakeshore Parkway. I had been on the bus coming back from a medical appointment. I looked out the window and recognized his car by the dent in the rear panel. I wrote down the address when I got home because it felt like something I should remember. I did not know at the time that the address belonged to Calvin Reese's office building. The attorney turned that page and stopped. He looked up at Neville. Then he looked at me. He said, "Mrs. Stewart, every entry in here is dated and internally consistent across 14 months. The payment amounts you recorded correspond to the transfer records we already hold. This is not circumstantial. This is corroboration." He said the notebook established a documented pattern of controlled financial distribution. Small mercy payments used to maintain compliance. That aligned precisely with the legal definition of exploitation under Alabama Code Section 38-9F-4. I told him I did not know I was building a case. I told him I was just trying to remember what was real. That some mornings I woke up uncertain enough about my own life that I needed to read back through what I had written just to confirm the ground beneath me. He looked at me for a moment, and then he nodded and went back to the notebook. Near the back, toward the last quarter of the pages, he slowed down. He reached an entry and began to read it, and I leaned forward and turned the page before he finished. He looked up. I said, "That one is not for today." He held my gaze for a moment. He was the kind of man who understood when a witness was managing their own testimony and why. He did not push. He closed the notebook. He set it on the desk between us with both hands flat on the cover. Carefully, precisely, the way you set down something you have just understood the full weight of. The bank statement was important. The transfer records were important. Landra's envelope was important. The notebook did not replace any of those things. It connected them. It showed what those records looked like from inside the life that had been lived through them. And for the first time since Neville knocked on my front door, I watched someone see the whole picture at once. I was not in the room when they met with Calvin Reese. The attorney had advised that Martha's presence would complicate the first conversation, that Calvin needed space to receive the information without feeling positioned between two parties before he had decided which way he stood. I understood the logic. I stayed home, and I waited. Neville called me 2 hours after they went in. He did not lead with a summary. He said, "Calvin Reese has his own records, Martha." He let that land before he said anything else. Then he walked me through it. Calvin had listened to the full picture without interrupting. The joint account, the redirected transfers, the capital contribution listed in Landra's name that had originated from money meant for me. He was quiet for a long time after the attorney finished. Then he started asking questions, specific ones. He wanted to know the exact percentage of the business capital that had come from redirected funds. He wanted to know the timeline, when the money moved, which months, how it corresponded to the investment schedule he and Terrell had agreed on. When the attorney gave him the figures, Calvin's expression changed. Neville said it was not the expression of a man who felt sorry for me. It was the expression of a man who had just understood that everything he believed about his business partner was constructed, that the foundation he had built a professional relationship on was not character. It was performance, paid for with someone else's money. Calvin told them that Terrell had represented himself as a man of independent means, that he had come to the table with documented capital, with confidence, with the kind of quiet financial authority that made a partner feel secure. Calvin said he had done his due diligence on the business structure. He had not thought to question the origin of Terrell's personal contribution, because men of independent means do not typically explain where their money comes from. They simply have it. He asked what the attorney needed from him. When Neville said those words to me, a man of independent means, I sat down. I thought about that Sunday dinner 18 months ago. Terrell at the head of his table, relaxed and expansive, talking about Calvin Reese the way a man talks about a chapter of his life that is finally going the way he planned. He had used words like integrity and opportunity and the right kind of partnership. He had looked like a man building something real. I had believed him. I had told him I was proud. He had been in that chair, at a table in a house my money built, performing financial credibility for a man he was going to bring into a business funded by my poverty. Every word of confidence he spoke that evening was borrowed. Every gesture of a man of independent means was costumed. He had taken my sacrifice, dressed it in his own name, and presented it to Calvin Reese as character. And I had smiled across that table and thanked Landra for the food. Neville said Calvin did not make any decisions that day. He asked for copies of the records and said he wanted his own attorney to review everything before taking a formal position. Several days passed. His attorney compared the transfer records against partnership documents, investment schedules, correspondence, and financial disclosures Terrell had provided over the years. They reviewed the structure of the venture independently and verified the portions of capital that appeared to originate from the redirected funds. Only after that review was completed did Calvin call our attorney himself. He said he wanted to be listed as a co-plaintiff, that he was prepared to provide his own financial records, his own correspondence with Terrell, and his account of every representation Terrell had made about his personal capital. He was not doing it for me. He was doing it because a man had looked him in the eye and built a lie and called it a partnership. But the result was the same. Neville told me Calvin shook his hand before they left. Not a formal handshake. The kind that means something has been decided and both parties understand what it is. I sat in my kitchen with the phone against my chest after Neville hung up. Terrell had planned for many things. He had not planned for the man he performed for to become the man who helped dismantle him. The attorney called on a Monday morning and asked us to come in. His voice on the phone was measured in the specific way that meant he had something in front of him he needed us to see in person. Neville picked me up, and we did not talk much on the drive over. I had learned by then that Neville went quiet when he was preparing himself. I did the same. The attorney had a document on his desk when we sat down. He turned it to face us and let us read it before he said anything. It was a power of attorney. My name at the top, my signature at the bottom. I recognized the signature immediately, the particular way I formed the M in Martha, the slight leftward lean I had never been able to correct. The signature was real. I had signed this document. I remembered the occasion vaguely. Terrell had put it in front of me 4 years ago and said it was for emergencies, just in case something happened, and he needed to manage my affairs without delay. He said every responsible family had one. I had signed it the same way I signed things Terrell presented, because he was my son, and I trusted him, and the language in the middle of documents had never been the part I understood. The language in the middle was precisely what had become the problem. The attorney explained it without rushing. Terrell's attorney had produced this document as evidence that I had authorized the financial decisions now being challenged. But after comparing it against other records and descriptions of the original agreement, several provisions appeared materially different from what had originally been represented. The document I remembered signing had specific and narrow scope. It authorized Terrell to manage one household account in the event of Martha's incapacitation. What sat on the attorney's desk now read differently. The scope language described blanket authorization for all financial decisions, across all accounts, for the full duration of the management period. 3 years. Every transaction. Authorized by Martha Stewart, according to this document. Terrell had presented it to his own attorney as proof that I was an informed and consenting participant in every financial decision he had made on my behalf. Neville's jaw tightened. He asked how long determining exactly what had happened would take. The attorney said forensic document examination was not a rapid process. The original signed version would need to be located if possible. The document itself would need to be reviewed. Any earlier copies, drafts, scans, or related records would need to be compared. Weeks, possibly longer depending on the examiner's schedule. In the meantime, Terrell's attorney could still use the document to introduce uncertainty into the civil proceedings. Not enough to win, but enough to slow everything down, to complicate the filing, to introduce the suggestion that Martha had known and consented, and was now reconsidering a voluntary arrangement. That was the play. Not victory, delay, exhaustion, the slow erosion of everyone's will to keep going. I sat and looked at my own signature on that page. He had kept this document for 4 years. He had stored it and waited, and when everything else began falling away from him, he had taken it out and handed it to an attorney with my name on it like a shield. Whether the language had been altered later or whether the document had been repurposed in a way I never understood, the result was the same. He had taken the one thing I gave him freely, my trust, and sharpened it into something designed to cut me. I thought about Landra at my kitchen table 8 days ago. The manila envelope, the financial management agreement she had described, the same category of document, the same mechanism. She had mentioned photographing something before she brought the originals. She had said it quietly, almost as an aside, the way you mentioned something you did on instinct before you knew why. I did not say this out loud in the attorney's office. I simply looked at my name on that document, Martha Stewart, used against Martha Stewart. And I felt something move through my chest that was not fear, and was not grief, and was not anything that had a clean name. It was harder than both of those things, and it did not feel like an ending. The attorney called Landra the morning after our meeting. I was not in that conversation either, but Neville was, and he told me everything afterward, the way he had been telling me everything, completely, in sequence, leaving nothing softened. Landra did not hesitate. She said she had photographed the original document the night she found it, before she had decided to come to my house, before she knew what she was going to do with any of it. She had been sitting at her kitchen desk under the lamp, and something in her had said to take the picture before she touched anything else. She did not know at the time that Terrell would alter that document. She did not photograph it because she anticipated his move. She photographed it because she had stopped trusting the feeling that nothing was wrong. She sent the image to the attorney within the hour. The original scope language was clear in the photograph, narrow, specific, limited to one household account in the event of incapacitation. Nothing close to the blanket authorization Terrell's version described. The attorney compared the photograph against the document Terrell's attorney had produced. He reviewed the wording line by line and confirmed that the provisions at issue were materially different. The photograph did not prove every question surrounding the document by itself, but it established that the language now being relied upon had not appeared in the earlier version Landra photographed. The attorney placed the two versions side by side, and the difference was not subtle. It was not a matter of interpretation. It was a matter of what the words said before and what they said after. Terrell's final argument collapsed before it could be formally filed. His attorney withdrew the document from the proceedings 2 days later without explanation. The lengthy forensic dispute everyone had been preparing for suddenly became far less important. The delay Terrell had hoped to create lasted exactly as long as it took for the earlier version of the document to surface. The civil suit was filed on a Wednesday. Martha Stewart and Calvin Reese as co-plaintiffs against Terrell Stewart. Conversion of funds. Elder financial abuse under Alabama Code, Section 38-9 F-4. Fraudulent misrepresentation to a business partner. 3 causes of action. 3 years of evidence behind each one. Terrell was served at his home on a Thursday morning. I was in my kitchen folding laundry when Neville called. The sun was coming through the window above the sink the way it does in Birmingham in the late morning. Low and warm and direct. The kind of light that makes ordinary things look considered. I had a shirt in my hands. One of my good church blouses. The cream one with the small buttons. I was smoothing the collar flat when the phone rang. Neville said, "It's done, Martha. He's been served." I said, "All right." I kept folding. I did not put the laundry down and sit with the moment. I did not describe to myself what Terrell's face looked like when that envelope was handed to him at his front door. I had spent 3 years imagining things that turned out to be worse than anything I had imagined. I was finished spending energy on pictures I could not verify. What I felt standing at that kitchen counter was not triumph. Triumph is loud and needs an audience. What I felt was older than that and quieter. It was the specific sensation of a weight that had been carried alone being lifted and distributed across the hands of people who were now legally obligated to help carry it. The attorney, the court, Calvin Reese's records, Landra's photograph, Neville's transfers, my notebook. None of it was mine to hold alone anymore. I folded the cream blouse and set it on the pile and picked up the next shirt. Outside the window, the Alabama morning continued the way Alabama mornings do, unhurried, indifferent to what had just happened inside courtrooms and at front doors across the city. The light did not change because Terrell had been served. The neighborhood did not go quiet in acknowledgement, but the quiet inside my kitchen felt different than it had in 3 years. It felt like something I was allowed to have. I was not in the deposition room. The attorney had advised against it, not because my presence would weaken anything, but because watching your son be dismantled across a table is a different thing from knowing it happened, and he wanted me clear-headed for whatever came after. Neville sat in the hallway outside. I stayed home with my Bible open on the kitchen table and did not pretend to read it. Neville called me that evening and told me everything. Terrell had arrived with his attorney, a Birmingham man, careful and experienced, the kind of counsel you hire when you know the case against you has weight. He sat down across from our attorney and his posture was still controlled, still performing. Even then, Neville said, he watched Terrell through the glass panel in the door for the first few minutes before he was asked to move to the waiting area, and the control was still there. The set of the shoulders, the measured way he arranged himself in the chair. It did not last the morning. The attorney began with the wire transfer records, month by month, 36 months. He asked Terrell to confirm each transfer amount, and Terrell confirmed them. Short answers, his attorney occasionally interjecting with objections that slowed the pace without changing the direction. Then the attorney moved to the account statements Landra had provided. The transfers in, the transfers out, the lifestyle purchases cross-referenced against the months the money moved. A mortgage payment on a house in Landra's name, dated to the same week as a $20,000 transfer from the joint account. Vehicle financing on 2 cars. The commercial property investment capital moved in 3 installments across a 4-month period. Terrell's answers shortened. Then they shortened again. His attorney objected to the framing of 2 questions. The objections were technically valid and procedurally useless. The documents answered the questions regardless of whether Terrell did. Then, the attorney opened the notebook. He did not go to the first page. He turned directly to the entry Martha would not let him read aloud in their meeting. The page she had covered with her hand and said was not for today. He found it without hesitation because he had known exactly where it was since the moment she turned the page. He placed the notebook on the table facing Terrell. 4 words. Martha's handwriting. Dated to a specific Thursday, 41 weeks ago. He seemed very pleased. The attorney told Terrell that the date of that entry corresponded to the week Terrell called his mother, a call Martha had logged in the notebook, and that the same week, $43,000 moved from the joint account into the commercial property investment vehicle in a single transfer, the largest single movement of funds in the entire 3-year period. The attorney did not present the notebook as proof of where the money went. The financial records had already done that. He presented it as something else, a contemporaneous observation, a note written before any lawsuit existed, before any accusation had been made, before Martha knew what any of those transfers meant. She had simply noticed that her son's voice sounded unusually pleased and written it down because she was trying to remember what was real. Terrell looked at his mother's handwriting on that page. He did not answer. His attorney did not object. Neville told me something else. For the first time all day, Terrell stopped looking at the attorney, stopped looking at the documents, stopped looking at his own counsel. He looked only at the notebook. The room held the particular stillness of a man who has run out of ground and knows it. Not the stillness of composure, but the stillness of a person who has stopped calculating because the calculations have stopped working. The deposition continued for another 40 minutes. Terrell answered some questions and declined others. But the energy had left the room on his side. Neville said that by the final 20 minutes, Terrell's own attorney had stopped objecting to anything. He was writing on his notepad instead, quietly, steadily, the way a man writes when he is no longer defending a position and has begun evaluating the cost of continuing the fight. When it was over, the attorney closed the notebook. The same hands, the same careful placement on the table, the same gesture as the first time, except now it carried everything it had taken to get here. The case settled 8 months after the deposition. I will tell you the terms, the way the attorney explained them to me. Plainly, without decoration, because that is how justice should be named when it finally arrives. Terrell agreed to a structured repayment schedule covering the full amount redirected across the 3-year period, every dollar documented in the wire transfer records. The commercial property venture was restructured. The portion of capital that originated from my money was formally separated from Calvin Reese's legitimate investment and transferred back through a court-supervised process that protected Calvin's position while dismantling Terrell's. Calvin Reese got his partnership back without the partner who had deceived him. I got what had been taken. Landra's cooperation was formally documented. Her reduced personal liability was the legal recognition of a distinction the law is capable of making when the evidence supports it. She had benefited. She had been willfully ignorant. And she had also been the person who walked to my back door with a manila envelope and told the truth about what was in it. The law held all 3 of those things simultaneously and arrived at a number that reflected her cooperation. I did not argue with that number. Alabama's Elder Financial Abuse Statute carries criminal penalties. The attorney explained that the evidence could be provided to law enforcement and reviewed for possible criminal action. He also explained something else. Criminal cases move on their own timetable, under standards and priorities that belong to prosecutors, not victims. Civil recovery did not. I chose not to make a criminal case my objective. I want to be clear about why. Not because I forgave Terrell, and not because I wanted to protect him from consequences he had earned. I chose the civil path because I wanted two specific things: my money returned and his architecture dismantled. And the civil process delivered both of those things with more certainty and less delay than waiting on a criminal proceeding might have. Precision is not mercy. Sometimes it simply means knowing exactly what you came for and leaving with it. The house is gone. The cars are gone. The business that was built on my poverty no longer carries his name. Calvin Reese knows what Terrell is. The deacons who received his concerned visits about my memory know what Terrell is. The church community that watched me survive on benevolence while my son drove a paid-off car knows what Terrell is. He has no folder left to open. He has no performance left to give because every stage he built has been taken apart, board by board. Some people will say that is not enough, that a man who did what he did should have faced a courtroom and a sentence. I understand that feeling. I let people have it. I have the first bank account that has ever been in my name alone, a checking account and a savings account both. Opened on a Tuesday morning with Neville sitting beside me at the bank. They gave me a card with my name embossed on the front. Martha Stewart. I have run my thumb across those letters more times than I can count, because something in me still needs the confirmation that it is real. 2 weeks before Neville's flight back to the UK, he sat with me at my kitchen table one last time. We had coffee. The Alabama afternoon came through the window the way it always does, unhurried, warm, indifferent to everything that had happened in this house and around this table over the previous year. He asked me when I knew. I reached for my Bible. I opened it, between Job and Psalms, and took out the bank statement, the one that had arrived by mistake 14 months before he knocked on my front door. I slid it across the table to him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at me. I told him I did not know what it meant exactly, but I knew it meant something. So I kept it. And I waited for someone who could help me understand it. Neville did not say anything. He placed his hand over mine, and we sat in the quiet of that ordinary Wednesday afternoon. Mine, finally, in every sense of the word. I never stopped trusting God. I just started writing things down,